Welcome back, guys. I trust you are doing well. Wish you a Merry Christmas and a prosperous New Year. Now, the drug game is very unforgiving. There are a lot of people in the long list of past drug lords, recent drug lords, and even as of today, current drug lords who are reading the airwaves with their daring escapades, their brazen courage, seemingly, and then the atrocious things that some of them are doing. We all know that names like El Chapo, Pablo Escobar, cjng, Sinaloa Cartel, the Cali Cartel, amongst others, begin to shake bones and trigger fear in the hearts and minds of people who hear them, especially if they seek to step up against them. But like I said before in a previous video, it seems that many a times when the drug game is being talked about, many people focus their attention on the South American aspect of the drug game, but little seemingly do people know that the drug game has caught up with other continents like Africa, and South Africa is also suffering the brunt of the drug game in its streets and neighborhoods. Today's true crime story will look at how an alleged crime boss in South Africa rose to prominence and would end up meeting a fatal end, suspiciously at the hands of somebody suspected to be a family member. And with that, we'll be looking at the true crime story of Ernest Ernie Lastig Solomon, a former leader, allegedly, of a drug gang who would end up gunned down in the streets with his family with him. If you are ready for this ride, you know what to do. Just buckle up and let's go. So, like I've always been saying, before we get into the main issue at hand, it is always good that we go down to the foundation or the genesis, and maybe, just maybe, we will be able to understand the man and the method behind his madness. So, who was Ernest Ernie Lastig Solomon? Now, Ernest was a former leader of the 28th gang, whose name was more recently linked to the Terrible Josters Gang, and he was deemed somewhat of a chameleon because apparently he was trying to shed the image of he being a gang boss by trying to reinvent himself as a peacemaker and a musician. You heard me right. But now his name is on a growing list of murders linked to organized crime and high-level investigations that are pertaining to those crimes. Even in his death, his name still comes up in such investigations. Now, the former 28th gang boss Ernest Ernie Lastig Solomon, whose name was previously linked to the Berlimon trade and other suspected crimes, was murdered in Boksburg, Gauteng, and this came 6 months after he was wounded in a shooting in the fishing village of Houston in the Western Cape. Now, for those of you who are not aware of this, he was actually killed in 2020, but we are going to dig deeper to understand the possible reasons as to how come his life was taken from him in such a gruesome manner with his young son with him in the car. That is how ruthless the drug game is. They don't really care who you are with, whether it's even a kid, and sometimes they might even come after your kid, just so you are going to endure a lifetime of pain due to the loss of such a person in your life, because they know you deem this person valuable and you have so much love for this person. That is how twisted it is. So forget about what you see on TV. This is real life. Now, sources said that his murder was inevitable as his name had for months been resurfacing in matters relating to dubious activities, including a massive court case centered around his nephew Horatio Woody Solomon, who was also accused of crimes including murder and of being the leader of the Terrible Josters Gang. Now, the state believes this gang is deeply involved in the tick and mandrax trade. A source indicated that it was bound to end this way, that Solomon's murder was actually inevitable. Another source said that several gang members still referred to Solomon as the beginning of the number and the end of the number. Note this statement down. At the end of the video, I will go into it and vividly, elaborately explain and actually quote a statement that Solomon made on the number gang and how deep it runs in South Africa. Now, there were fears that Solomon's murder would spark retaliatory attacks or cause gangs to reconfigure, which would then cause friction among rival groups. Horatio Solomon, his nephew on the other hand, who was wounded, and his 13-year-old daughter killed in a shooting in March of 2020, was sentenced to life imprisonment in the Western Cape High Court in October of 2020. So, like I told you, sometimes it could even extend to the younger ones that are deemed as your loved ones around you. And that's how unforgiving the drug game is. Now, Solomon and his son had been wounded in a shooting in Houston roughly 2 months after Horatio was wounded in May of the same year, and it was believed to have been a result of friction within the Terrible Josters Gang. So this is where the twists and the plots get tricky. This is a story between an uncle and a nephew, all in the same gang. The uncle, that's Ernie Solomon, is the former leader of the 28th gang, and he now leads the Terrible Josters Gang. And per reports, it's alleged that there was an ongoing power struggle between himself and the son of his sister, who is Woody. And to that extent, the suspicion is that it triggered the attacks on each of them, where at a point, his nephew's daughter, who was just 13 years old, would lose her life. So, the story continues. The Terrible Josters are constantly engaged in gang wars in the areas where drug dealing operations take place, and once opposing gangs are annihilated or they surrender, the remaining rival gang members are incorporated into the gang and then added to the Terrible prefix to their gang name. Court papers relating to Horatio Solomon's case would actually prove this. So it was more like conquer and then command and expand. Now, in order to safeguard their interests, the gang, through its members, would possess and use illegal firearms, commit murders and attempted murder, and acts of intimidation against witnesses who may be rival gang members or ordinary members of the community. So it was evident that they had their community and even their opponents in a stranglehold. You just had to think twice before you decided to step up against them. But Ernie Solomon's murder came just 2 months after Lieutenant Colonel Carl Kenya of the anti-gang unit at the time was assassinated outside his home in the suburb of Bishop Lavis, which was an area widely known to be 28's gang theft in Cape Town. And this was a killing which has churned up suspicions of entrenched corruption among police and their suspected links to underworld figures. It also marked nearly over a year since another senior figure on Cape Town's gang landscape, former Hard Living's leader, Rashid Stagi was shot dead in the Cape Town suburb of Salt River in December of 2019. So if you thought Sinaloa cartel, the CJNG, the Cali cartel, Angel Felix Gallardo, and the rest were ruthless, well, this is an African version of it. In real life, in modern day, some are just over a year or two ago, and they are still ongoing as of today. At the time, rumors had surfaced that Solomon or someone close to him may have had a hand in Stagi's killing, but Solomon was not charged for the killing. Other theories of Stagi's killing included that he may have somehow got on the wrong side of more junior gangsters who wanted to teach older figures a lesson that they were no longer in control. And to date, it is not yet clear who was behind Solomon's murder. Now, on Friday, after he was killed, the immediate Friday following, the police spokesperson, Captain K, without providing any names, said that one person had been killed and 3 others, including a child, wounded in a shooting that happened during the morning in Boxburg. And it was believed at the time that 4 suspects were involved. So this was how the news broke. It is reported that a white Ford Ranger bumped and intercepted a white BMW with 4 occupants inside. 2 alleged men alighted from the Ford Ranger and started shooting at the car. The suspects allegedly then abandoned the Ford Ranger on the scene and fled in a getaway car with unknown description and unknown registration number. Solomon has been closely linked to organized crime and gangsterism. Now, in the mid-1990s, he was among a group that started the controversial grouping Community Outreach, better known as CORE in Cape Town, a now defunct organization ostensibly aimed at stunting gangsterism, but which some later pointed to as a smokescreen for crime. So, like I said, the twists just keep getting unbelievable. He was actually cited as being part of a group in the early 1990s that was formed to prevent crimes, but it would end up that that group was in itself a smokescreen. It was a front to actually promote their criminal activities. Now, sometimes you look at how smart some of these alleged gangsters are, and you begin to understand what is meant by street smart. Some of them are so smart, you can't get that intelligence in school, honestly. Now, others involved in CORE at the time had included Rashid Stagi and brothers Michael and Jerome Donkey Boosen, who was shot at and wounded several times between 2017 and 2018 in Cape Town. Now, in 2003, police would go on to label Solomon, who at one stage faced charges including the possession of unlicensed firearms, and he was labeled as a high flyer in the criminal world. But several years later, around 2011, Solomon apparently tried to shed his image by instead trying to prevent crimes. He had been involved in so-called peace talks to try to call a truce between warring gangs in Cape Town. The city's mayor at the time was alleged to be involved in some of these processes. But in 2013, Solomon would also become the focus of a movie titled A Lucky Man, and this was a movie about his life. And in the following years, he would dabble between music and also launch a few albums. And about 2 years after that, he was also reported to be a koi chef. So you see the nickname, the chameleon coming into play. He's trying seemingly to shed his criminal past, dabbling with music, movies, and even becoming a choir chef at a point. But then, all that was not to be, because not long after that, it was reported in the case against Horatio Solomon, which was heard in the Western Cape High Court in 2019, that Solomon, that is his uncle, had ordered the 2013 assassination of Leon Davids in retaliation for the killing of underworld Kingpin Cyril Beaker. Cyril Beaker was murdered in a hit in the Cape Town suburb of Belleville South in March 2011. It was widely suspected that Davids had pulled the trigger on Beaker. In the state's summary of facts against Horatio Solomon, it was further claimed the Terrible Josters Gang was involved in Davids' assassination. It was alleged that an accused in the Terrible Josters case, focused on Horatio Solomon, had contacted a state witness and informed him that he received an instruction that Leon Davids, alias Leon G, must definitely be killed. And the reason that Leon G must be killed was because he and another person had murdered Cyril Beaker, who was linked to their top leader and had fed him information on a competing gang leader. This was according to that state witness. However, this state witness and an associate had not managed to carry out the killing because Davids was not where they thought he would be. It was claimed the mission to murder Davids was allegedly instead given to Horatio Solomon, and Davids was killed on 9th October 2013, but no arrests were ever officially announced for this murder. If Davids had indeed murdered Beaker, it meant a potential star state witness. But that was not to be. On a Facebook page appearing to be that of Ernest Solomon, a quote was posted on Thursday, and it said, "If I look at my life today, where I was, where I am now, what I went through, I believe it was just grace. Amen. Thank you, Lord." So it seems like he had found grace, he had found God, he had seen a reason to just give some praise and thanks to his maker. Because obviously at a point, your life will definitely flash before your eyes. And this seemingly was coming from a man who knew what he had gone through, and he understood the fact that he could have easily been dead at the time, but he had seemingly lived a long life, at least enough to come out, do music, go on, have a movie done on his life, go on, and also even be a choir chef, enjoy his family. He was in his 60s and all. But you know, there's something about crime that catches up with you. And like I said earlier, Ernest Solomon had talked about what he did with regards to the number gang, and he had talked about how the number gang was sort of seemingly like a spiritual thing, to the point that you can't really escape it, to the point that it can actually change you to an extent, to the point that it's a bit controversial actually to really decide that you are going against the numbers gang. But the question now remained, who killed Ernest Ernie Lastig Solomon? This is the theory out there. The theory is that a family feud was what got him killed. He was killed at the age of 62, and it was reported that there were tensions between himself and his nephew, Horatio Woody Solomon, who was 31 years. And it's also reported and alleged that that feud led to them beefing amidst the violence, and that beef and the violence that came with it would eventually lead to Woody's 13-year-old daughter being killed in a shootout whilst with him. And it's also suspected and alleged that that is what triggered the retaliation shooting on Ernest 2 months before his death, which he survived but would not survive the last one that took his life 2 months afterwards. His son was with him. Fortunately, his son got hit but survived. Other people were with him, they all survived. He was the only one that got killed. And according to the reports out there, the gunmen were so bent on taking him out that aside just shooting at the car, they actually got on the car and they shot through the roof as well, just to be sure that his car was not bulletproof and that he was being saved. So they decided to shoot through the roof as well, and they got him. It's sad how these drug games or this drug game, for example, or I don't even know how to put it, ends up where people who are arguably innocent get caught up in the crossfire, in the struggle for money and power and some form of respect. Now, Ernest himself would allude to this when he made these statements about the prison number gangs. I mentioned them earlier, and I'm going to quote what he said just so we would get a deeper perspective on everything that has happened. It's as though he knew his time would come. Now, this is what he said. The prison number gangs are so cruel that sometimes a father kills his own son or the son kills his father. And there are many children who grow up without fathers because of this number we believe in. Now, he said this in a video clip, and you begin to understand what was going on in his mind and in his world. He knew the reality he was caught up in, and he went on to say further, the number is like a gem. It comes into you when you are in prison. We all got it in us. I also got the gem in me. People die every day because of this story of the number. This cut in my face I got because of the number. I was very young and didn't know what the number really means to me. Now, I must try to make it right for my people or my next generations before I am not in this world anymore. I am 54 years old, and all the years of my life I was losing friends, and those friends were like my brothers and like my children. When they died, I felt it in my heart, but I never thought of the day when I'm going to die. Now, Solomon, at the time of saying this, or at the time of his passing, had been in the 28th gang for 37 years. And you would see that he said this at the age of 54. That was 8 years before he would end up being killed. But he knew it's going to be inevitable. He knew his time was coming because it looks like there's an internal system that sort of recycles the leadership and the gang. He went on further again to say, when you are out of the number, stay out. Your own brothers are going to kill you because of your reputation you built. That is why I am here, and this is part of my medicine I want to give to you as my friends and my brothers in the number. Be careful, you are going to kill your family and your own community, and after that, your own brothers are going to kill you. He warned. There is only one way out of the number, and that is if you become converted. But it doesn't mean you are totally out of the woods. Because once outside, that converted person will be tempted on a daily basis to hide, for example, drugs, said Ernie Solomon. Now, this is all part of the test to see if this gang member's sudden turnaround is genuine. They do these things to test the person. And if that former gang member succumbs to the temptations, he's actually going to be taken out. So it's a whole system with its own philosophy and code. And in as much as it's gruesome and unforgiving, we cannot actually pretend it's not there. This is the reality for some young people at some places in South Africa, and it would culminate in the shooting and death of Ernie Lastig Solomon, a life cut short at 62, and a life that had seen so many versions. That's his nickname, the Chameleon. But what do you think about the consequences of the drug game in our streets? What do you think about its implications for the African continent? It's like the things we used to see in movies, the things we used to see in documentaries about some world-class popular drug kingpins are now getting closer and closer to our doorsteps. Leave your comments in the comment section. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel if you already haven't done so. Thank you for your support so far. Wish you a Merry Christmas once again, but hey, keep an eye out. Stay safe out there. Catch you next time.